Hello, welcome to Books and Brews,
the place where beer and literature meet.
With your host, certified Cicerone Michael Agnew.
And Laura Mosica, author of the Bluebells Chronicles.
Each month we invite a guest author to read their words and talk about writing while sipping beers specially paired with their work.
Today's guest is Sandra Lynne Reed.
So sit back,
pop a cold one,
and dive into some books
and brews.
5, 4, 3, 2, start that clock.
It's going. So
okay, good.
Back to, are we on episode 19 of Books and Brews?
Then we're in. We're on.
We're on. Are we on to, so what was I telling you about technology? I can just sort of Skype into my lessons. I can go on up to Duluth and, sit in my hotel room with the keyboard and Skype lessons and have vacation and still get my job done. So
nice.
It's kind of great.
You go places. I mean, that's a good thing. You actually go places. I don't go anywhere.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm going to be doing a whole lot more of seeing my kids, going down to Iowa to see one son, going up to North Dakota to see another, maybe to Winona to see a third. So I can go anywhere now. It's great.
Wow. Yeah, because I was saying I travel a lot usually. I haven't taken a single trip anywhere this year. The most I did was I went to Rockford, Illinois for a day to do a show in February.
That's the last time. Yeah. Well, you have to make some plans to go somewhere then.
Yeah, I'm toying with, so this is the time I would usually take my Utah trip. But I don't want to fly because I don't want to sit in a tube with a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
And it's like 3 days to drive there.
Well, that depends how fast you drive and how often you sleep.
Well, true. I could not sleep and get there much faster.
Well, when I was 30, I did
good days of driving to get there. So if I take, my usual 10-day trip, 6 of that is in the car.
Yeah. Well, you can take turns driving, can't you?
No, because I'd go by myself. Masako is teaching, so she can't go.
Oh, okay. Because, see, I used to drive, our guest today, Sandra Lynne Reed, lives out in Sequim, Washington, so she knows what I'm talking about. I used to drive from Bremerton to Minneapolis, and I could do it in 29 hours. It was, when I was significantly younger, and I just put a case of caffeine, otherwise known as Diet Pepsi, between the two front seats, and I said, kids, strap up. We're not getting out for, 500 miles before the next bathroom because I've got to get there. So we are episode 19. We'll just say we are, and if it turns out to be different, we'll fix that later because that's
all right.
Right? Yeah. So how's your month been?
It's been good. Kind of boring. Not really doing much.
Good. Boring.
For the theater.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Not much else going on.
That's about, I've been doing my taxes because I always love to delay until the last minute. I've been editing. I've started packing. I mentioned for the program that I will be moving a bit of a short distance. So I've been packing up my numerous research books and music books and about to pack up my music theology books, taking some trips up to Duluth, like I mentioned. So, but yeah.
Cool. What you been reading?
Well, I've been reading the titles of all the books I've been packing. That's about it. And all those times I've covered for you, it's your turn to cover for me. I've been looking at, the titles. I still have The Baron and the Trees in my Kindle books. I read that, but I still haven't.
I did read a book this time.
Woohoo!
So I read a book called Caste, The Origin of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. It was a great book. So it was for work, but still, it was a fantastic read. So basically she reframes white supremacy and systemic racism in the United States as a caste system similar to the caste system in India.
Okay.
It doesn't provide a lot of new information on the impacts of systemic racism, but that reframing makes it all so clear and makes it all make so much sense. Even though, you know, I talk about those things for a living and I do a lot of, you know, self-education and whatnot. This book's felt paradigm shifting to me in terms of thinking about those issues.
I think I've heard about that book.
It's just, it should be a required read for everybody. And it's really well written. She uses a lot of personal stories, both her own and stories gleaned from history and other people that she's met and interviewed. And that kind of, you know, like it personalizes the issues she's talking about. She is a journalist, and so the writing is just really clear and really easy and pleasant to read. So it doesn't get into a lot of jargon and things like some of the books that I read. It's a great book. I highly recommend it to anybody. Like I said, it's a required reading for everybody.
Yeah. I have a few books I feel that way about. So we have with us today, I am really excited to meet her a little more face to face. Sandra Lynne Reed and I have actually been Facebook friends for about 3 or 4 years or more than that?
I think probably 7 or 8 years, maybe.
Has it been that long?
We were in a online critique group together.
Really?
Years ago, doing medieval fiction.
Oh my gosh, I don't even remember that. What group?
I don't remember the name of it. It was a long time ago.
Okay, but it wasn't on Facebook?
I think it was maybe through a Yahoo group or an email group of some kind with, I can't remember who all else was in it really, but some others that I've stayed in touch with, a couple of them.
I'm sometimes amazed at the things I have forgotten. I apologize. So you probably knew quite a bit about my books before they were published.
I remember reading segments. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so you know the background, Michael. I actually beta read Sandy's book that we're talking about today, The Drive-In 55. Sandy, would you say that was about 3 years ago or longer than that?
It was a couple of years ago.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking it was about 2 or 3. So let me give the official introduction. Sandy was born and raised in Alaska. She graduated from the University of Alaska and became a travel agent. After marriage, she helped run her husband's real estate appraisal business until their children were grown while doing freelance writing. She and her family left Alaska in 1988 and have lived in Western Washington since 1991, which is where I lived too for a long time. A lifelong fascination with the Middle Ages stoked her interest in historical fiction, and she traveled to Italy to research a novel set in the 13th century Kingdom of Naples. Her passion for family history keeps the drama of the past alive for her and sometimes inspires story ideas for novels or nonfiction. So, welcome. Do you go by Sandra or Sandy?
Most people call me Sandy.
So we'll call,
So we'll call you Sandra.
Suit yourself. I'll answer to either.
So, Michael, what's our first beer today?
So our first beer today, so I assume we're doing these readings in the order that they are on the document that you sent. So
Yes.
we're starting with a major
Earthquake.
obstacle.
The major obstacle, yes.
Great. So the first beer is a beer that I could not find, but it is the beer that I wanted, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. I don't know whether they don't make it anymore or whether it just isn't available in our market, but I couldn't find it anywhere. So I'm going to share my screen here so that you can at least see what this beer is. That is, if I can find it. The stupid share screen goes away. So let me do it. There you go. So this is Earthquake High Gravity Lager. This is basically a 10% alcohol malt liquor. So I can tell you what it's going to taste like, even though I have never tried it before. It's going to be extremely sweet, maybe a little bit boozy, golden, grainy, but primarily sweet and boozy. It is, think American lager times 3.
Okay.
But how could I pass up the name?
Yeah, that's a great name for this reading.
It's perfect. You can't, I couldn't have gone anywhere else. So, since I don't have it to drink, I can't describe it to you. So, Sandy, if you want to go ahead and dive into that reading, have at it.
Yeah.
And it'll become clear why I chose that beer.
It certainly is clear to me.
Go ahead.
Okay, so we began planning our Drive-In 65 in 1962, and we did run into a major obstacle. For several months, with every weekend visit to Moose Pass, Mom and Phyllis gathered all of us together for brainstorming. Where did we most want to go? Each of us had wonders in mind. Surfing, the Empire State Building, the cliff dwellings. By early 1964, Phyllis had purchased a van and negotiated with her husband, Bill, to modify it for our needs. We needed places for everyone to sleep and rooftop storage. What could we, the kids, do to earn spending money for the trip? I sometimes babysat to earn money, and since we had the Friday before Easter off school, Marley and I walked a half-mile to a babysitting job with our friend Becky, watching 5 little kids in an apartment on Minnesota Drive while their mother ran errands. We tried to keep the toddlers amused and played games with the older kids. Then a table lamp tipped over. I looked up. Which child knocked that down? A floor lamp rocked back and forth with nobody near it. Becky, Marley, and I exchanged glances with a shocked awareness. Earthquake. Sandy, quick, under the table, Becky said as she shoved the baby into my arms. We urged the kids to safety while the floor shifted and rolled beneath our feet. A sewing machine on the table teetered dangerously. Save it, cried the oldest boy. Mom needs it for her sewing jobs. Marley hefted the 15-pound sewing machine. Straining with all her 10-year-old might, she lowered it to the floor. She yanked the chairs away and rushed to join me and the kids beneath the table. The concrete floor became a carnival ride. The fourplex groaned. Dishes shattered into broken heaps. The kids screamed in terror, shaken by the earth. Quakes were familiar to us, but unlike the usual temblors that lasted only seconds, this one rumbled more than 4 minutes. We waited it out, comforting the children as best we could with our own voices shaking. Finally, the earth stilled. Silence. We crept out. Lamps lay on the concrete floor, now streaked with cracks. Shards of dishes and food from the counters and cabinets littered the kitchen. The children's few toys were flung around the rooms. Power had failed, and the little remaining afternoon light reflected off the snow outside. As we gazed in shocked silence, the baby wailed, echoed by the shrill wail of sirens outside. Earthquakes are a fact of life in Alaska, especially along the southern coast. I didn't think too much about its severity or the damage beyond the apartment where we waited. With no injuries to tend, we cleaned up broken dishes and food, tried to distract the children, and waited anxiously for their mom to return. As darkness fell nearly an hour later, the children's mother burst through the door. "Where are the kids?" she demanded, panicky until she saw them all. She hugged each one, just to be sure. "What did you do when the quake started?" We described our ordeal with excited comments from the kids, but she stopped us, clearly angry. "You stayed in the house? Why didn't you take them outside?" I couldn't understand that. We had done what we'd been taught in earthquake drills at school, and her children were all safe, unharmed. However, none of us wanted an argument. We quickly split the babysitting money with Becky, all of us eager to return home. Marley and I donned boots and coats and walked through twilight brightened by snow. Lights should have shone in the stores with the bright windows of nearby houses lighting our way. Instead, all was eerily dark and silent, broken by an occasional car or distant siren. We pointed out to each other the damage around us, broken windows in our neighborhood grocery store and tilting power poles. Someone walked around one house shining a flashlight on the foundation. And was that a whiff of natural gas in the air? Our house escaped major damage. The concrete porch tilted away from the front door a couple of inches, and the basement floor had a few cracks, but like everyone else, we had no power, no phone, or natural gas.
I thought it was very funny. Just as you started saying snowing, I realized it's snowing outside my window, and it just started as you said that, and it came down very suddenly, freezing rain. Is it doing that where you are, Michael?
Not at this. It's not snowing at this moment.
Well, it might be heading down there soon. So, wow, that's quite a story, and it reminds me of one of the earthquakes that happened when I lived in Bremerton, where there was a lot of damage in Seattle, and we called my parents here in Minneapolis and said, "We're alive, we're alive." They're like, "Okay." They thought it would be big news, but and it reminds me of a hurricane we had here too. So seeing that damage afterward. This is your first book?
It is my first book, although I've been a writer for a long time and had a lot of things, freelance articles and other things published. But yeah, a book is a different animal. I spent about 6 years altogether from starting the writing till it was published in July.
Yes, yeah. Okay. It's an amazing story. Why did you wait 50 years to write it?
Well, of course, at the beginning, I was still a teenager when we got back. And although I even then loved writing and in high school said I wanted to be a writer, my mom and aunt actually always had planned to write the story of this trip and started it a couple different times and made little bits and starts at it. So for a long time, I just assumed it was their story to write. But my aunt developed dementia in the early 2000s, and I became her legal guardian for her last 7 years, and she passed away, and I started writing pretty seriously shortly after that.
Okay. Did you use some of what they had already written, or is this all from scratch that you wrote?
Well, because I'm writing it from my point of view, and they had begun the book as they imagined it as a series of letters, an epistolary kind of novel or report on the, they were taking some liberties and using our letters, our actual letters, which fortunately for me, they insisted that all the letters we sent home be saved for us. And I have them, everyone, postcards and all of that.
You continued some of that format of quoting from the letters.
Yes, I did quote from the letters throughout the book, and tried to include the experiences and viewpoints of the other 7 people who were on the trip.
Yeah, and I really like that. And speaking of the other 7 people, can you gave me a perfect segue to what was going to be my next question anyway. Can you give us a bit of a summary of the 8 people who were on this trip?
So my mom and her sister Phyllis came up with the idea, and they were in their 30s at that time and had left New York as kids in 1945 and moved to Alaska and hadn't been back nearly 20 years. And they, between them, had 5 kids, myself and my brother and sister, and my aunt's 2 kids, my cousin Jim, who was 2 years older than me, and my cousin Michelle, we called Mikey, who was the same age as my younger sister, just a year and a half younger than me.
Mhm.
So, and my youngest brother was the youngest on the trip. He was 9 and turned 10 that summer.
Mhm.
And
what
then,
was his name?
and then our grandma came along.
Mhm.
So we were going to go through areas where her brothers lived, who she hadn't seen in 20 years.
Oh, wonderful.
To go.
Yeah, and in those days, I think it was a lot harder to go see people, especially when you lived up in Alaska.
Yes, it was.
Maybe today. So what was it that inspired this idea, that gave them this idea to do this?
Well, they began talking about going back to New York and how much fun it would be to go see their cousins that they had grown up like I had in Alaska. They had grown up in New York with lots and lots of cousins around them, and they were their close friends. And so they wanted to go back there, and they had a younger sister who had moved out of Alaska, the only one of their 7 siblings in their family who had left Alaska, and she lived near Washington, D.C. So they wanted to see their family, and that was the initial motivation. But you know, when you live in Alaska and you're so far from everything, if you're going to make a trip that far, you are really highly motivated to include a lot of other things too.
Right.
And
Right.
boy, did we.
It ended up being what, 14 weeks?
14 weeks. We left Alaska May 22nd and returned just at the end of August, and traveled 22,000 miles.
That's incredible. And you did face some obstacles in making this happen. I think a lot of people doubted that these 3 women, you know, and in their 30s no less, with 5 kids between them, I think a lot of people doubted that.
My dad and my Uncle Bill just scoffed at the whole idea. They thought we were being crazy, and they just said, you know, they over and over, you'll never make it to the Canadian border. You're going to be back here tomorrow night. Stuff like that. So
what inspired you to keep going? Because the 8 of you persevered for 2 years, working for this, planning it, saving the money for it, getting a vehicle that would accommodate all of you and give sleeping arrangements. What motivated you to persevere when, you know, you're being scoffed at?
Well, my mom and aunt were very determined people, and they, you know, to some degree, the scoffing ignited the fire even hotter because they weren't going to be told they couldn't do something. But it was a challenge because it was a time in history when, you know, they couldn't get a credit card in their own name, and women, you know, women's place in the world has changed dramatically since 1960s.
Yes.
And so they did show a lot of courage and perseverance in sticking to the plan. And of course, we were all excited about the potential for seeing these parts of the country that we'd only read about in a, you know, National Geographic or Time magazine.
Yeah, and isn't that great? Because I can remember now, my time frame was a little bit behind yours, but in 1980, well, my dad was in the Air Force, and so we made the move from the East Coast to Duluth, and I had read about this fantastic water park in, where was it, Ontario, I think. And so I had, you know, it wasn't on the same scale as yours, but it was a similar thing where I read about this and said, hey, let's move from the East Coast to Duluth by way of Canada. And so we did, you know, and it was a great trip. So we are ready for beer number 2.
Okay, beer number 2. So sometimes even with a beer and food pairing, rather than looking at the whole dish, you look at just a little piece of it and kind of aim for that. That's what I did with this story. The one image that really stood out to me, that kind of stuck with me, was Fireflies. This whole little episode with the Fireflies, the lightning bugs. And I could just see, reading that moment, I could just see the like momentary flashes of the Fireflies buzzing around. And so I wanted a beer that was as ephemeral as that. And so I happened to find a beer that is called Éphémère, which means ephemeral. So the name is appropriate, but the beer itself is also very ephemeral. It is from Unibroue, which is a Belgian-style brewery in Quebec. And this beer is a lightly spiced Belgian-style wheat beer with a touch of apple. It is really light. The apple is just sort of in the background, kind of wafts in and out. It's a really delicate beer that I think, has that same sort of ephemeral spring, summertime feel as that episode in the story with the Fireflies had for me reading it. So cheers.
Now I'm feeling left out.
I know, you're too far away. This is really a delightful beer. There's just that touch of apple in the background. You get the breadiness of the wheat. It's got coriander and orange peel that blend in there as well, but don't overwhelm. It's just really delicate and layered and lovely.
Very lovely. Well, we're ready for reading number 2. I call this in New York, but Fireflies is good too.
Okay, so the trip was inspired by the desire to reconnect with their family, and this is what that looked like. Mom and Phyllis, and even calm and quiet Graham, grew more excited by the mile as we crossed Rhode Island on June 8th, headed to Bridgeport, Connecticut. From there, we would catch the ferry to Port Jefferson, New York on Long Island, then to Smithtown, the hometown they left behind in 1945, only 12 miles away. My stomach rose and fell with the waves as we crossed Long Island Sound, but the nausea dissipated quickly after we landed, with heightened anticipation of meeting Mom's many cousins. These New York relatives peopled childhood tales told by Graham or Mom, and they were legends in our minds. Jerry Valentine, a cousin about my mom's age, tormented her as a child. In one humiliating incident, he held her against a tree in the yard until she wet her pants and laughed as she ran home crying. I'll admit to a little anxiety about meeting this thug. Lo and behold, Jerry Valentine greeted us with hugs, invited us in out of the heat, and offered lemonade or a soda, which we had always called pop. Could this be the villain of Mom's childhood stories? We began to question the reports about him. Another cousin, George Arns, let us stay in his house, a big vintage home more than 100 years old, according to a letter Mikey wrote to her dad. Very few structures in Alaska were that old in 1965, and we considered the house a historical treasure. We brought our bags inside and sorted out the sleeping arrangements, which allowed private bedrooms for Mom and Phyllis. As the sun dropped into the west and the oppressive heat lifted a little, we gathered outside on the lawn with cold drinks, watching light fade in the neighborhood. "Hey," Glenn shouted. All heads swiveled toward him, but he seemed to be staring across the yard in a trance. "There, did you see that light?" "I see it," I said, as a tiny light flashed a few inches above the grass. Then another. Magic spread over the lawn with flashes of light glowing for a second or two and disappearing into the darkening green. "There's another one." I pointed to a flash of light already fading. "What is it?" Glenn asked. Glenn asked what we all wanted to know. Mom and Phyllis grinned like kids. "Lightning bugs." Mom ran into the house and rummaged around the kitchen for a jar. "Catch them in here. They'll make a little lamp for the yard." We stalked the lawn, capturing the miniature flashlights in our cupped hands and adding them to the mayonnaise jar. The magical moment, the discovery of fireflies, stayed with us for years. We tested the waters of Long Island Sound on a beach that Mom called Little Africa, one of her childhood haunts. The disgusting seaweed smells brought tears of nostalgia to Mom's eyes. I sunbathed in my first two-piece swimsuit, blue with a white belt at the waist and scalloped edge below my bust. Jim spent much of the week hanging out with cousin Raymond, who had a motorcycle but no license. They kept to the back alleys and woods and had a lot of fun together. Jim wrote these observations to his dad. You know, I always thought being from New York would be something, but these guys don't know so much. Or anyway, they sure don't think the same way we do. They sure don't get out and see the world or anything. They think we really know how to live because we're taking this trip. But they're afraid to leave their own places. And they're herded around like sheep. On the streets, there are signs that tell you when to walk and when not to walk. For Jim, who grew up in a town of a couple hundred people with no traffic lights and only 1 or 2 stop signs, life on Long Island seemed strange in many ways. Smithtown had more manicured lawns than in all of Alaska. Up there, we did well to keep the forest from encroaching too close to the house. I, too, remember being mystified by these relatives who lived only an hour's drive from Manhattan, but never visited the city unless absolutely unavoidable. Back in Alaska, my family drove 2 hours from Anchorage to Moose Pass almost every weekend for years until the earthquake destroyed the road. I began to realize, like Jim did, that it wasn't where you lived, but how you thought about life that made you the person you were.
I love that. That's a profound ending. So I think you have a map handy, don't you?
I do, and it kind of gives a little more perspective on where all we traveled.
Oh, wow.
So
for those who are listening on podcast, you can go to YouTube and you'll be able to see what Sandy is pointing to. Go ahead, show the route that you took.
So we started in Anchorage. You travel a little bit north before you enter Canada, and then went south east across the Canada and entered the States again at International Falls, Minnesota. We visited relatives in Wisconsin, went on over to Boston and Cape Cod, and down the East Coast with a week-long stop in New York and a week-long stop in Virginia where we had family, and mostly just stopping no more than a night. Visited across the southern coast and then up to Colorado where my Uncle Bill's relatives were, and he came out to meet us there, my aunt's husband, and we spent a week there, and then drove south to Mexico City, where we planned to stay for a few days, but a couple of us got pretty sick with the usual kind of food problems people encounter in Mexico. So we came back, but we made a wrong turn in Mexico. So we ended up going back east and had to cross Texas again, and came up the West Coast, and we took the ferry system from Prince Rupert to Haines in southeastern Alaska. And yeah,
that's a phenomenal route. Did you have that fully planned out, or did you leave room for just some kind of flying by the seat of your pants?
Well, we knew generally the route we wanted to take. And since we were doing quite a bit of camping, probably half the time, we did not have hotel reservations, here and plotted along the way. We just drove in pretty general terms to, whatever was our next destination. But we would, we knew we wanted to see the Grand Canyon, but we also stopped and saw the Painted Desert and the petrified forest, things in the, that area we wanted to see. And sometimes we had surprises. We'd stopped at places in Florida where there were Civil War forts that had been turned into state parks. And so we didn't really know those were there, but we had a lot of fun exploring those kind of places.
That is just, this whole thing is so amazing too. Not only that you did it, but in the day and age you did it, it was a different world. Yeah. It really was.
And I think one of the best things that Mom and Phyllis did in planning this trip was to invite all the kids to participate in the planning, and really had us buy into the trip by making sure that everybody had something special to them that they were going to be able to see.
Right, and also that you worked hard for it. I mean, that's got to be a profound lifelong lesson, that you could all pitch in and, walk dogs, babysit, shovel snow, whatever it was.
That our contributions made a difference.
Right. They really did. I was really interested in Jim's observation that, about Raymond, that being from New York wasn't what Jim expected. And I think it really, really struck me because my older daughter went to college in Manhattan at St. John's University. And she was just really shocked by how many of her classmates were from Long Island. They had literally never left Long Island. Like, they didn't even go to Manhattan, but they knew all about Minnesota. And they told her, they did not ask her, they told her, you don't have cities in Minnesota. Some of them literally believed that we don't have electricity here. And she's like, how do you think I was talking to you on the internet? And they would literally, some of them, not many hopefully, but a few of them would actually argue with her. Things like, you don't dress like you're from Minnesota. And she'd say, well, what does a Minnesotan dress like? Well, red flannel.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious, did Raymond also have some ideas about being from Alaska? Did he end up being surprised about what Alaska was like?
I don't remember Raymond in particular, but over and over again, we were questioned about igloos and did people really live in igloos, and was it, dark all winter long with no sunlight at all, and that kind of thing. The kind of misconceptions people often have about Alaska and still do, not maybe quite so universally, but at any place we stopped, gas stations or national parks, the Alaska license plates and our crazy vehicle with the stuff piled on top and
do you by any chance have a picture of that crazy vehicle handy?
Well, I have this is not a very good picture, and actually I don't have very good pictures, but this is a picture of it set up on the beach in Ventura, California. And they only made that style of vehicle. It's a Chevy Greenbrier van, a part of the Corvair series. And the little lean-to tent that rolled down from the side is where Mom and Phyllis and Grandma slept on those aluminum loungers. And Jim and I slept on a slide-out thing out the back doors with a tarp over it. And the three littler kids slept on the 3 bench seats.
That is just, I know I keep saying it, but it's phenomenal that you would plan and find a way to make something like that happen, including a vehicle that could have those sleeping accommodations.
Well, and 8 people in a 9-passenger van with no air conditioning for 22,000 miles. Nobody in their right mind would dream of doing that today.
I'm laughing because in 2006, my now ex-husband and I took our 9 kids plus my nephew on, again, not quite that scope, but we went from Minnesota across the top of the states, more or less, to Falls, and then we went down through Boston, New York City. We went all the way down to Colonial Williamsburg, and then cut back up. I don't remember if we hit Tennessee or Kentucky and came across Midwest America. And it was the same thing. I mean, we had a 15-passenger van and 12 of us.
Yes.
But I can appreciate, because we were packed. We were packed deals with camping equipment and enough clothes and food for all those people. So we are
a lot of people to feed.
Yes. Luckily, it was the 21st century and we had grocery stores, but still to take that much camping equipment even. So I can really appreciate what it must have been like in that car. And to this day, my sister's like, or not my sister, my daughter says, yeah, Mom, you were in the front seat. You have no idea how loud and hot it was in those back seats. So, we're ready for beer number 3. What do we have?
Okay, let me finish beer number 2. Beer number 3. So for this reading, the main things that kind of stand out, it's a feeling, really. It's like the dark with some sort of impending threat in the background. So I knew I wanted a porter or a stout or something like that to get to the darkness. But what was the impending threat? So I opted for a chili stout. The one that I chose is Bomb from Prairie Artisan Ales. This unfortunately has a whole bunch of other stuff in it that I didn't care about, like coffee and cocoa nibs and vanilla beans. But it was the only chili stout that I could find available, so I went with it anyway. But the idea there is the dark, and then you have this like stinging thing in the background that's going to come up and grab you out of that darkness. This is a really complex beer. All of those things going on in it.
Cheers.
Super malty, high alcohol. The vanilla comes out strong. The chili is really a background. It's an afterthought almost, but it still gives you just a little sting or a little tingle on the way out. Chocolate and vanilla being the primary.
Do I love this one or hate it or somewhere in between?
You probably would like this one. You like the malty stuff.
I think you're right. Right. It looks like one I would like.
Yeah.
So
I think you would really go for this one.
What?
I think you would really go for this one.
I'm going to have to try that one. I'm gathering a list of things I have to look for and try that I think I like. So we are ready for the reading on the Northwoods Axe Murderer.
Okay. Yes, this is a camping story we have shared a lot. After our cruise across Lake Michigan via train and car ferry, we found a small state park with camping spots, very peaceful, and in fact, all but empty on that weeknight and early in the season. We chose a spot not far from the only other camper in the whole place because we could swim in a nearby pond. The other camper, a man alone, offered us his fire and said he was leaving. We gladly moved into his sight. And while we kids swam in the pond, Mom, Phyllis, and Graham drove to a nearby store for supplies. The man watched us swimming and then asked if he could leave a couple of things at the campsite. We agreed and thought nothing of it, though when our moms returned, they thought it a little odd. Why didn't he just keep his belongings with him so he wouldn't need to come back later? When they walked to the pond to watch us splashing around, the sight of his tent set up again on the other side of the water surprised them. He strolled over and talked with them about Alaska and Michigan, and then returned around the pond as we started our dinner. Soon the stars appeared and time for bed. After our swim in the pond, most of us fell asleep quickly. Mom and Phyllis stretched out on their aluminum cots next to Graham. As the quiet of the night seeped in around them, Mom whispered, "Wasn't that guy a little strange?" Graham nodded. "I wish there were more campers here." Phyllis paused a minute and then whispered, "Should we leave?" "Let's not be ridiculous," Mom offered in a quavering voice. "There are 8 of us after all, and we haven't even slept yet." By this time, all 3 stared wide-eyed into the night through the mosquito netting, listening to every blowing leaf and squirrel's footstep. In the course of a few minutes, the soft-spoken man had become a predator, preparing his attack on us from his hideout across the pond. The 3 of them agreed to take turns staying awake, standing watch so the others could sleep. As they conferred, Phyllis said, "Wait, what was that noise?" "What noise?" "Shut up and listen." "I can't hear anything." "What did it sound like?" "I don't know. Winnie, get the flashlight." As Mom gripped the flashlight and took a step, she tripped over a transistor radio, falling against the open side of the van and jostling the sleeping kids. Whatever caused the noise, whether rabbit, raccoon, or rising wind, was now long gone. Now, the noise arose inside the van. "Will you guys be quiet?" Jim griped, punching his pillow and flopping onto his other side. Marley lifted her head and looked around. "What's the matter now?" Glenn poked his head over the front seat, frowning at the disturbance. "Sorry, everything's fine," Mom lied. "Go back to sleep." We drifted off again, ignorant of the looming danger. Phyllis took the first watch and described it this way. The axe murderer had no doubt relaxed on his haunches, waiting patiently for us to quiet down again. With every nerve alive and my life's supply of adrenaline surging to meet the foe, I was to just lie there till I got sleepy, then wake up Mom or Win. 5 minutes passed. 5 minutes filled with the strange night sounds of a strange, unfriendly place. I heard the footfalls of a panther and the heartbeat of a timber wolf close by. Every few moments I caught a glimpse of the night sky through the trees as they bent in brewing storm, but try as I might, my eyes could not pierce the black velvet night smothering us, and I had to rely solely on my ears, so that very soon I had to quit breathing almost entirely as I was making so much noise and might miss something important. Into this quiet watchfulness came the explosion of something dreadful in Winnie's area. "What?" I screamed, sitting bolt upright. "Shut up, you idiot," Winnie hissed. "I just slapped a mosquito." None of them slept. As dawn lightened the sky, they felt a bit foolish and even more exhausted. They woke us all at about 6 a.m. and we packed up our camp as quietly as we could, then stole away. Like zombies, Mom and Phyllis took turns driving across Michigan and through Ontario, Canada to Niagara Falls, where we rented nice, secure hotel rooms. We kids wondered what made them so crabby that day, and eventually they shared the whole story. For more than 50 years, we have recounted our narrow escape from the axe murderer in the Northwoods of Michigan.
Great story. So you have me curious, was this an older man, a younger man?
I don't remember him being especially young. He was probably, similar age to my mom and aunt. I would say in his 30s or 40s.
What sorts of things did he leave?
It seems to me he left maybe a lantern and a cooler or just some camping type equipment.
Huh.
And it didn't make sense that he would leave them. I don't know what was going on, but I also doubt that he was as dangerous as we imagined he was.
Well, you're alive, so
yes.
Clearly you're not. One of the things I would really like to know, in all of these adventures you had, what one or two things struck you the most through all of these adventures?
I think that the most impact on me was from seeing the historical things around the country. And of course, from our previous friendship that I'm a history buff and I've loved many things historical, and seeing the historical locations on the East Coast, especially, I think of, but they are all around the country, like those Civil War forts in Florida that I mentioned, and
that brings me to a question that I actually discussed. I've been doing other author interviews on a program I called Step Into a Story. And so I talked with Patty Tracy Perrin a couple weeks ago. And she, like me, was raised as a military brat. We traveled a lot. We saw a lot of these historic sites. So we discussed what the impact is of growing up in the military, because it seems like a lot of writers do have that military background, that they grew up as children, traveling. And so what do you think the impact of this trip was on your writing and on your interest in these things?
Well, it certainly sparked a strong interest in travel in me and in all of us. But just to recognize that the world is so full of interesting and wonderful things. You know, our life in Alaska had been, well, it sounds real adventurous to grow up in Alaska. It's very limiting too, because Moose Pass, a town of a couple hundred people, yeah, you know, the lake froze and you could drive a car across it, and people flew little airplanes. My grandfather had a small plane, and we flew out to remote locations, as if Moose Pass is not remote enough. But
well, and I think that goes to what you said in the previous reading, that it's not really about where you're from, but it's about how you look at life. And so what is your lesson from this? How should we look at life?
I think a lot of people are fearful about seeing new places, and it creates a lot of anxiety. I've traveled a lot in Italy, and southern Italy, for a lot of people has a reputation of being kind of a dangerous place, and some place you really don't want to, you know, get out off the beaten path. And I've traveled a lot in that part of the world and had some pretty fun adventures off the beaten path, and had some experiences that I wouldn't trade for anything. They met wonderful people, and so there certainly are areas of the world I'm more interested in than others, but I guess not too many areas I would really feel fearful to go. And like you talked about, you know, your daughter's classmates from Long Island who had never been off of Long Island. I know there are people who just don't think traveling has much to offer them, and they stay home, and they never leave their county or their state in their whole life.
And it's interesting. Some do because they don't think there's any value. Some just have the opportunity. Last question. You are very big on retaining family history, on preserving and passing on family history. And I asked this of Lisa Jareen, who was our last month's interview, and her stories are all about family history. Why are we so driven as people? Why is it so important to tell those family stories?
Well, in one sense, I want to be known. So this kind of a story that includes me is a way of making myself known in hopefully an entertaining and interesting way. But I also love to learn about my forebears, and I'm doing a big research project now about some Civil War ancestors that have a story I would love to learn more about and possibly tell in a book. But who would have thought that there would be, 5 or 6 major television series on genealogy? I think this is because we have such an information age. This kind of information is now more available than it's ever been. And people are finding more interest in it because you can find out. You don't have to, just write to some faraway place and hope that maybe somebody has the answer. You can find a lot more answers. I think people want to be known, and our history that makes us who we are is part of making ourselves known too. Right.
I think it teaches us a lot, if we dig into it and look at other people and how they lived. I mean,
the things they survived and the challenges they faced can give us a lot of courage. And that's one thing I think about this book. My mom and aunt were so courageous to plan this trip, and where from today's perspective it may not seem such a step of courage, it really was.
I think
for them.
even today, for two 30-something women and their mother to take off with 5 kids, I think even today that would be unusual. So, but yes, and one of the things I really liked about your book was getting to know these, your grandmother and your mother and your aunt as people. Their characters really came out, and I love that. Unfortunately, we are hitting the point where we need to give our links and where people can find you. So, Michael, what are our links online and what are yours?
We are at booksandbrews.net or Book and Brews on Instagram, Books and Brews with Laura Vosica and Michael Agnew on Facebook. I am at aperfectpint.net and Perfect Pint on all of the other things.
Well, all those links I've been giving. Yeah, the links, I still own them, but I've been juggling too many balls. I let these slip. So hopefully by the time this goes out, I will have solved this problem. But my link should be lauravosica.com or bluebellschronicles.com. And I am on Facebook, laura.vosica.author. I'm on Twitter /LauraVosica. And I have absolutely no upcoming events because virtually nobody in the world has any upcoming events. Are you going to break that trend, Michael?
I have a lot of events, none of them public.
Okay. What about you, Sandy? Do you have anything coming up?
And where can we find you?
You can find most of the information about me at sandralynnreid.com, and it's Lynn with an E on the end and Reid with 2 E's, sandralynnreid.com.
And it's Lynn with two N's too, right?
Yes.
Lynnne.
Lynnne. And okay. I'm on Facebook as Sandra Lynn Reid, and I have Instagram and Twitter accounts too. I don't tweet as much as I post on Facebook. So,
and I think that you had mentioned that if people go to your website, sandralynnreid.com, they will find some of the pictures from this trip, right?
Yes, there is a trip photo album there that's kind of fun to look through.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking forward to going and looking at that. I looked through some of the site over the past few days, but I didn't get to the photo album yet about that. And the question at the end of the hour.
Who is our guest next month?
I thought you'd never ask. Next month, we are having Sean Brink. And I have known him. I'm sorry, he is Sean D. Brink, and he's been on my Gabriel's Horn book club. And he has a funny story about why it has to be Sean D. Brink, which I talked to him about. But he wrote in a sort of Christian apocalyptic trilogy. And then he also wrote My Gypsy War Diary, it's kind of a neat book. It's set in his hometown where he grew up. I think it's called Belleville, Nebraska. And I could be wrong on that, but it sticks out because I lived in Belleville, Illinois. So I think I'm right on that. But anyway, it's Norfolk because I lived in Norfolk, Virginia. That's why I'm mixed up about it. But it's kind of a neat story about this young boy who lives in his own sort of fantasy world and then has this elderly neighbor, and all these kind of crazy things start happening, and he finds himself kind of almost like a Goonies type story, except with this little loner boy whose only friend is this elderly woman next door. So I always enjoy talking to him. I like his writing, and I am looking forward to that next week.
Sounds good.
Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandy, for joining us and sharing your words with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
This has been Books and Brews, episode 19. Thanks for tuning in, and cheers.